Donald Trump was just hit with disastrous polling, and even some of his former most ardent supporters are demanding the 25th Amendment be invoked and that he be impeached. Donald Trump has lost the support among white, non-college educated voters. Not only has he lost their support, he is significantly underwater with that demographic, net -8. Let me repeat that. Among white non-college voters, Trump right now is underwater, net -8. You take a look at this latest CNN SSRS poll, Donald Trump, the worst approval in modern presidential history, tied for his low approval mark right after the January 6th insurrection. 34% of Americans approve, 66% of Americans disapprove. When you look at the various issues in these crosstabs on immigration, Donald Trump net -22. Net -22 on immigration. The American people hate Donald Trump's Border Patrol and ICE Gestapo roaming streets, ripping families apart, throwing people in concentration camps. They did not go after the criminals. They went after hard-working people, and they threw them in concentration camps. They terrorized and tortured people, including citizens as well. On the economy, it gets way worse for Donald Trump. Net -40 on the Iran war, net -42, an all-time low for Donald Trump. On inflation, Trump net -50. Let me repeat that. Net -50. And on gas prices, which Donald Trump promised on day one he would bring to under $2 a gallon, net -58. Net -58. And when you take a look, by the way, of that cohort group of white non-college voters, Donald Trump in 2018, +9. Donald Trump October 2020, +8. February 2025, +24. July 2026, net -8. That is a new low as well. You take a look also at the crosstabs, not only of white non-college, among male voters, among men in general. It's very discouraging as a man to see men supporting Donald Trump.
If some of us could be snatched off the streets without a warrant, based only on suspicion or skin color, then none of us are safe. Authoritarian regimes begin by targeting people who are least able to defend themselves, but they do not stop there. This brazen abuse of power by a sitting president inflamed a combustible situation, putting our people, our officers, and even our National Guard at risk. Take time, reflect on this perilous moment. A president who wants to be bound by no law or constitution, perpetuating a unified assault on American traditions.
He held up a pair of knee pads. In Davos, Switzerland, at the World Economic Forum, in front of a global audience of finance ministers and business leaders, California Governor Gavin Newsom reached into his bag and produced what he described as Trump's signature series knee pads. And the room laughed before he pivoted, mid-joke, into something considerably more serious. It's not what we should be doing, he admitted, but you've got to point out the absurdity. Tonight, we're walking through a real, documented year-long escalation between Trump and Newsom. The National Guard deployment Newsom called a rehearsal for authoritarianism, his real, gravest threat to American democracy declaration, and the exact moment he admitted, on stage, in front of the world, that he lives rent-free in the Trump administration's head. Then we're closing with breaking news from just today. Trump considering pulling his own Attorney General nominee entirely. Let's start with the Davos moment in full, because it deserves to be understood beyond the knee pad joke alone. Speaking at a special session moderated by Samartha's Ben Smith, Newsom framed his own provocations as a deliberate, considered strategy. Not simply venting frustration, but attempting to put a mirror up to Trump and his allies. He specifically cited Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's own real, documented insult toward him, calling Newsom Patrick Bateman meets Sparkle Beach Ken, as evidence of exactly how thoroughly senior administration officials had leaned into personal attacks rather than substantive policy debate. And then Newsom said something genuinely remarkable for a sitting governor to admit publicly. were deeply in their head. I think the affordability agenda appears to be on living rent-free in the Trump administration's head. He went further still, acknowledging Trump's own specific political skill. That's his great strength, his ability to detect weakness. That's his gift, but you punch back. You fight fire with fire. It's worth understanding Newsom's own political trajectory before diving deeper into this specific feud, because his background gives real context to why he's become such a consistent, central figure in opposition to this administration. He has served as governor of California since 2019, leading the country's most populous state and one that consistently leads the nation in implementing progressive policy. He was floated as a potential replacement candidate for Biden following the troubled 2024 debate performance, publicly declined to pursue that opportunity.
2024 election, Donald Trump net negative 26. And we already knew that, women don't support Donald Trump, but amongst men, net negative 26 right now, whereas in 2018, he was +8. Even among Republican voters right now, he's only +54 among Republican voters. That means he's almost underwater at this point. He's losing significant amounts of Republican support. In addition, the Quinnipiac poll shows that Democrats hold an 18-point enthusiasm advantage heading into the midterms. That's unheard of. That's unheard of high. 57% for Democrats, 39% for Republicans. You take a look at this split ticket 2026 midterm election model. Not only do they have the Democrats crushing Republicans in the House of Representatives, notwithstanding all of Donald Trump's gerrymander schemes, but you take a look right here at the United States Senate right now. They project Democrats take control of the Senate right now if things continue down this path. And you take a look even at state regime media, which calls itself Fox. They're polling right here. In Georgia, you have Democratic Senator Ossoff destroying Collins right now. In North Carolina, you've got the former Democratic Governor Cooper, who I've had on a lot on the Midas Touch Network, crushing the former RNC chair who's running against him, Whatley. In Ohio, Sherrod Brown, the former senator from Ohio, Democrat, crushing Husted, the MAGA Republican extremist right now. In Iowa, Josh Turek, love Josh Turek, surging ahead of Hinson, that MAGA Republican extremist. Now in Maine, Collins was slightly ahead of Graham Plattner before Plattner dropped out, but now people believe that Maine can be in that category for Democrats as well. And also, Texas will be close. And as I said, don't sleep on Idaho. Don't sleep on Idaho. The Democratic candidate dropped out, put support behind an independent candidate who's a former Democratic state representative right there. And that race can look awfully close. The MAGA Republican senator there currently chairs the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and he's one of the main people who got us into this catastrophic and unlawful war with Netanyahu against Iran, which has crushed our economy and has led to the deaths of our service members. So utterly disgusting. Here's how they described some of this new polling on CNN. And they said, it's as bad as you get pretty much in this type of polling. Let's play it.
This new CNN poll has the president at just a 34% approval rating. For context, this is the same career low of his first term after the January 6th insurrection. So that's got to be pretty bad. The president hit a new low among Republicans, too, with only 19% of his own party now saying they're enthusiastic about the rest of his second term. That's down nearly 20 points from last spring. The sinking numbers tie back to a range of connected issues. A majority of Americans are displeased with the president's focus on construction projects during his second term, as he announced today that renovations are going to begin on Virginia's Dulles Airport imminently. Also, more Americans now expect the Iran war to be headed towards a long-term conflict, as around 3/4 say the rise in gas prices, one extremely tangible impact of the war, has caused them some financial hardship personally. A similar number say the president has not gone far enough to reduce the price of everyday goods. That was a key campaign promise of his from 2024. And speaking of campaign,
they had the worst jobs numbers in the first year of the Trump administration.
outside a recession since 2003. Inflation is not lowering. It's mass deportations, tariffs that are impacting ranchers and farmers and small business folks, a major tax that they celebrate, collecting. It's a failed strategy, and the impacts of that strategy are being felt all throughout the United States of America, including my state that has been disproportionately impacted.
And ultimately endorsed fellow Californian Kamala Harris, meaning his current national prominence emerged specifically through choosing institutional loyalty over personal ambition at that exact moment, only to become, in the aftermath, one of the party's most visible national figures anyway. Let me give you my full analysis of why that specific admission matters so much, because I think it reveals a considerably more self-aware political strategist than the pure knee-pad joke headline suggests. Newsom is not claiming victory in this feud. He's explicitly acknowledging its costs, calling the entire exchange deeply unbecoming in the same breath as defending it, while simultaneously making a specific, considered argument about why he's doing it anyway. That is a genuinely different register than reflexive political combat. It's someone consciously choosing a strategy, weighing its downsides in real time, on a global stage, rather than simply reacting. It's worth explaining the specific Besant insult a bit further, because its sheer strangeness deserves real attention on its own terms. Patrick Bateman meets Sparkle Beach Ken is a genuinely unusual combination of cultural references for a sitting Treasury Secretary to deploy against a sitting governor, invoking the fictional serial killer protagonist of American Psycho alongside a deliberately absurdist beach-themed variation on a children's toy. That a cabinet-level economic official chose that specific, almost surreal register of insult rather than any substantive critique of Newsom's actual policy record tells you something about how thoroughly personal attack has replaced policy engagement across this entire administration's public communications strategy. Now let's go back to the origin of this specific year's escalation, because it began with a real, documented use of federal military force that deserves the full context. In mid-2025, Trump deployed National Guard troops to Los Angeles in response to immigration protests, doing so without the request or authorization of California's own state officials. A genuinely significant departure from the normal process governing when the National Guard can be federalized over a governor's objection. Newsom's response was direct and specific. He called the deployment a test run, a rehearsal, saying he's measuring how far he can go. That specific framing, not simply objecting to the policy, but characterizing it as a deliberate trial run for something larger, is precisely the kind of structural warning we've documented across multiple other figures throughout this entire series, from Rachel Maddow's more desperate, more reckless framework to Ana Navarro's own multi-year prediction about exactly this pattern. It's worth explaining exactly why the National Guard deployment represented such an unusual legal move, because federalizing a state's own guard forces...
All this comes as the November midterm elections are only 97 days away. The president so far has given his party very few domestic policy bright spots to run on. His approval ratings on election integrity and voting rights, on immigration, and on federal government management all sit slightly above his overall approval, although all of them still a ways from even 50% approval.
Then you had Alex Jones saying that Donald Trump needs to be impeached and removed, whether it's 25th Amendment or impeachment. Alex Jones, one of the former big Trump supporters, listen to what he just said. Play this clip.
The big issue is how to stop Trump. And we have to have Congress go for the war powers. They've 3 times tried to vote war powers. They're supposed to authorize a war. This is a war. They're getting the draft ready. If this isn't a war, nothing's a war. I mean, this is absolutely out of control. And so I'm calling for it right now. 25th Amendment, impeachment, whatever needs to happen to get this front and center, to get control of our country. It's impeachable alone that the president's supporting the NDAA.
Then you had on the right-wing podcast like Tucker Carlson. Here's what he had to say. Let's play it.
Okay. Like this Straight Hormuz stuff, like, from what I understand, like nobody really controlled it before. But now Iran has discovered, like, holy shit, like the United States can't even shut us down. So now I'm sure there's going to be tax and escorts and everything until the end of time, because if we can't shut them down, nobody's going to shut them down. You know what I mean? And so, hello, new gas prices, like they're not fucking coming back.
We just turned Iran into a global power.
Yeah.
And it will remain a global power for the rest of our lives, at least.
Good job, admin.
Yeah, good job.
I even note the reporting on state regime media Fox on Fox Business talking about how consumers right now are just getting absolutely crushed by these Trump oligarchs. They're just crushing consumers. Here, let's play this clip.
Procter & Gamble, they're a consumer staple, the kings thereof. They're down 3.8%. What, people don't buy what they're selling?
Correct. So higher inflation is pulling back, means the lower income consumer is pulling back. Fabric and home, a 1% volume increase, but grooming, baby, family care, 1% volume drop. Healthcare, think Oral-B, Vicks, a 3% volume drop. They're trying to make it up with pricing, but this is a tricky pricing environment right now. So when volume drops, it tells you something more fundamental going on with the business.
So I talk about a boring stock. This thing's done nothing for at least 5+ years.
Yeah.
And consumer staples overall are kind of a tough space. We basically only own nicotine within consumer staples, because there's actually growth there. But these guys, they're actually losing business to lower priced competition right now, which is strange. I mean, you think people still have to brush their teeth. They're going to buy, Procter & Gamble stuff, but they're actually finding cheaper alternatives.
Then you've got Trump's energy secretary, Chris Wright, complaining that people are blaming data centers for high electricity prices. And Chris Wright says, what are you talking about? It's Obama's fault. The data centers decrease your electricity prices. The data centers make everything good. What are you talking about? Here, play this clip.
Mr. Secretary, a lot of Americans are skeptical of data centers. They've heard a lot of horror stories about various things. For the people who are watching right now who have concerns, what would you like to say to them?
Of course, there's a fear campaign going on right now. And why it's going on is the Democrats, since the election of President.
Meanwhile, Governor Newsom is calling on world leaders to do more to combat the Trump administration, speaking to reporters on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum in Davos. Newsom said, quote, it's time to have principles, it's time to stand tall and strong, and it's time to stand united. Take a listen.
I can't take this complicity. People rolling over. I should have brought a bunch of knee pads for all the world leaders. Handing out crowns and this is pathetic. Nobel Prizes that are being given away. It's just pathetic. And I hope people understand how pathetic they look on the world stage. At least from an American perspective. This guy's playing folks for fools, and it's embarrassing.
Without gubernatorial request or consent is genuinely rare in modern American history. That authority exists under specific federal statutes typically reserved for extraordinary circumstances: genuine insurrection, invasion, or a state's own inability to enforce federal law. And using it specifically to respond to immigration protests over the explicit objection of the state's own governor represents exactly the kind of boundary-testing exercise of executive authority Newsom's own. Rehearsal framing was designed to highlight. If you're finding this real material as sharp as we do, hit that like button right now and subscribe to USA Press, because we're giving you a full year of documented escalation, not a single viral clip. Stick around, because we're closing with something that broke today involving Trump's own Attorney General nominee. Let's talk about the actual legal fight that followed the National Guard deployment, because it genuinely ended up in court, and that matters for understanding how seriously both sides treated the underlying constitutional question. The dispute over federal authority to deploy troops against a governor's wishes became a real, litigated legal battle. Not simply a war of words on social media, but an actual test of the boundary between federal and state authority that had rarely been pushed this directly in modern American history. That legal fight sits at the center of why Newsom has continued returning to this exact incident across nearly every subsequent public statement documented in this report. It wasn't a single news cycle, it was a genuine precedent-setting confrontation. Now let's cover the primetime speech response, because this is genuinely one of Newsom's sharpest and most direct statements of the entire year, and it deserves full context. It's worth briefly reconnecting this specific speech to our earlier, dedicated coverage of it, because the underlying event was genuinely significant enough to warrant its own separate report. That primetime address included declassified documents Trump characterized as proof of foreign election interference. Documents that independent fact-checkers, including David Becker of the Center for Election Innovation and Research, subsequently found simply didn't show what Trump claimed, delivering the verdict that the White House promised a bombshell, and they delivered a dud. Newsom's response arrived directly in the aftermath of that same, already disputed speech. After Trump delivered a 27-minute address from the East Room of the White House, the same primetime speech reviving 2020 election fraud claims we've detailed extensively across multiple previous reports on this channel. Newsom posted a blistering video response to X. His actual words, he wants to rig the election in 2026. He knows he's going to lose. He needs to rig.
Obama has spent 17 years pushing up electricity prices. Blue states have 50% higher electricity prices than red states. And now they figure they've got the perfect scapegoat. It wasn't our bad green policies. It was data centers that did it.
And one of the things that Americans are baffled by, although they shouldn't because Donald Trump is a real sicko, is that Donald Trump always talks about golden ballrooms and arcs and arches and painting the statues 24 karat gold and is turning it into like a bunker military company and all this stuff. Dude, shut up. I did a deal. Americans are sick of this disgusting, vile creature. Here, this is what he says. My arc, dude, shut up. Play this clip.
This is an important one. This is travel. So in terms of the importance, I think the arc is going to be incredible. I think the protected ballroom and military center that we're building at the White House is going to be unbelievable. It's very important. But, this is the airport. This is sort of the lifeblood of a city or a capital.
Now I want to bring in the Democratic candidate for governor of California, Javier Becerra. Mr. Becerra, it's great to see you. I want to chat California and Donald Trump's attack on the state already, attack on the elections here. He's creating his cosplay fan fiction, which I think the more you'll see of him, you'll know he just like makes up these dark, twisted fantasies. And, the one he talks about in California is that the reason that Hilton's actually in the race is because Donald Trump got involved and Donald Trump was like, I've got his back. And he's figured out the solution and he called up the federal prosecutors. And then if it wasn't for him, it would all have been stolen. And it's like, dude, just shut up. And I just think I want to get into his other efforts, the MAGA Prop 39 and everything. But I just want to start here because, we saw his attacks on California with the smelt.
Let me speak directly to anyone considering helping President Trump interfere with our election or our count. If you violate California's laws, if you interfere with our voters, tamper with our ballots, or meddle in our election, you will be prosecuted. Doesn't matter who gave the order. That's why I'm moving forward with new legislation that would make it a felony to seize ballots before the vote has been certified by state and county officials. We will be the wall he cannot get past. Because we believe that once an election is decided, the winner governs for everyone. That's the architecture of American liberty. Donald Trump, he doesn't believe in that architecture.
The election before one vote was cast. That's what that whole thing was about tonight. He went further than simple criticism, actually invoking the 25th Amendment, the constitutional mechanism for removing a president deemed unable to discharge the duties of office, as a genuine, if provocative, response to what he characterized as Trump's mad speech. Let me give you my full analysis of why invoking the 25th Amendment specifically deserves real attention, because it represents a considerably more serious escalation than typical political criticism. That constitutional provision exists for genuinely extreme circumstances. Presidential incapacity, not policy disagreement. And for a sitting governor to publicly suggest its application represents him staking out one of the most serious institutional positions any Democratic official took throughout this entire election fraud speech saga. The White House's own response, delivered through spokesman Davis Ingle, notably did not engage with the substance of that constitutional argument at all. Gavin Newsom is the worst governor in America, and he also may be the dumbest. Notice, once again, the exact pattern we've documented across dozens of stories throughout this entire series. No substantive rebuttal, simply personal insult. It's worth explaining the actual mechanics of the 25th Amendment briefly, because understanding the real procedural requirements clarifies just how serious and how genuinely difficult to actually invoke Newsom's suggestion really was. The amendment requires either the president's own voluntary declaration of incapacity or a formal determination by the vice president together with a majority of the cabinet. Meaning any real invocation would require the cooperation of officials appointed by and loyal to Trump himself, making the amendment's practical application in this specific political context essentially theoretical. Newsom's invocation of it was therefore less a genuine procedural demand than a maximally serious rhetorical device, chosen specifically because of how rarely and how gravely that particular constitutional provision has historically been discussed. Let's talk about the 4th of July speech too, because it represents Newsom's most polished, deliberately crafted statement of the entire year, and it deserves to be quoted at length. During America's 250th anniversary celebrations, Newsom delivered a filmed address running more than 8 minutes, arguing that the nation's democratic promise is under threat from what he called a corrupt and unstable president. His specific formulation deserves to be heard in full. Which is why, on America's 250th birthday, we need a declaration of election independence. Freedom from election manipulators and deniers, freedom from the militarization of Election Day, freedom from
fish and saying he turned on faucets and he saved the day with the wildfires while still not giving California what's needed in order to get through a natural disaster, but by making up these fake stories. But what's your reaction now that you're kind of seeing it? I know you knew it existed, but now that it's really kind of coming your way as the main Democratic nominee.
Ben, it's a lot of noise. That's one thing this president is good at, is creating a lot of noise. Unfortunately, the noise is oftentimes very dangerous, very harmful, but it's noise. And a state like California has the capacity to try to deal with this kind of noise. When I was Attorney General of California, when Trump was president the first time, we took on his noise. I had to sue the guy over 100 times to stop him from trying to destroy our values, our state, our resources. But you can do it. He just creates a lot of noise. And now with these elections coming up, it's clear he's focused his attention, his noise, on trying to disrupt our election, make it more difficult for folks to vote, intimidate those who are not as familiar with the voting process. Maybe they're new citizens and they're voting for the first time, or they're new voters because they just turned 18. It's one of those things where Trump, the MAGA forces, Republicans in California are trying to do everything they can to keep people from voting because they know if people vote, Republicans will lose.
I was driving up the coastline here in California over the weekend, traveling with my family. We did the typical travel through the travel up the coast, and we were just reflecting as a family. I had my mother-in-law, my wife's mom, and her sister in the car. We were just looking around, and we're like, "This is so beautiful." And this is such an incredible, it's such an incredible state with such diversity. We stopped along the way at the different missions and saw people from just all different walks of life and people who look different. And everyone, I was just like, why? This is what they want to attack. It's this happiness and the attacks on our state, always here in California, coming from the kind of miserable Mar-a-Lago crowd. It just became obvious. Like they hate the happiness here, huh?
I don't know. It's sort of the Grinch 365. California's going to be California. And that's the beauty about this state. And the fact that our people are so ingenious, so innovative, that we're going to get past this stuff. Certainly our families are hurting when Donald Trump denies healthcare funding. A lot of families in California will get hurt. One of the things that I hope to do as governor is make sure that regardless of the man-made disasters coming from Washington, D.C., Californians can count on having access to the healthcare that they need. But it's kind of strange. It's almost a jealousy. They are envious, some people, of everything that our state offers. And it's just natural what our state can offer. Then when you add to that the human talent that makes us this economic dynamo, it's a double whammy against those who just don't want to see some places succeed. So we'll go forward, and we'll look for ways to partner with the federal government where we can, because they are our biggest partner. But at the same time, we'll stand up where we need to defend our people, our resources, our values.
One of the front lines of that fight is.
You talk about wrecking ball presidency. I mean, certainly reflected symbolically and substantively in the imperial palace that he's trying to, the Kremlin West Wing that he's trying to recreate. All this has, Donald Trump, it's all about destruction, and destruction is not strength. He's not a builder. Remember years ago, it was like, who's this Ryburn guy? He says, well, he had a great quote. I always remember the quote when I was a kid. He goes, any jackass can, knock down a barn. It takes a skilled carpenter to build one. Forgive me, but Donald Trump is a jackass. I believe that.
And the fear of imprisonment if you don't go along with Trump's schemes. That is a genuinely sophisticated piece of political rhetoric, deliberately echoing the language of the actual Declaration of Independence on the exact anniversary of its signing to frame opposition to this administration as continuous with America's own founding revolutionary tradition rather than simply partisan grievance. It's worth sitting with the specific structure of that Declaration of Election Independence language a bit longer, because it directly mirrors the grievance-based structure of the actual 1776 document it's referencing. The original declaration built its entire argument around a specific list of grievances against a monarch before declaring independence as the necessary remedy. Newsom's own three-part freedom from construction, election manipulation, militarized election day, fear of imprisonment, deliberately borrows that exact rhetorical architecture, applying it to a sitting American president rather than a distant colonial monarch, which is precisely the kind of pointed historical echo that generated so much subsequent political commentary. Let me give you my full analysis of why that specific rhetorical choice matters, because it connects directly to material we detailed in an earlier report covering Barack Obama's own presidential center speech. The same no kings language deployed by a different Democratic figure on a different occasion, but built around the same underlying argument. That opposition to this administration represents a defense of foundational American democratic principles rather than ordinary partisan positioning. That two of the most prominent Democratic figures in the country independently reached for nearly identical rhetorical frameworks months apart suggests this specific argument has become something closer to a coordinated, if organic, party-wide messaging strategy heading into the midterms. Now let's cover the July 14th statement specifically, because it's the most recent, most direct escalation we haven't fully detailed yet. Newsom posted directly to X, Donald Trump is the greatest.
Trump's attack on voting. His view is if he can rig the election, if he can suppress people's vote, maybe he's got a better shot. I don't know. So you have these MAGA propositions like Prop 39 trying to just create these technical things to hope that if it's pushed through, people will forget to put certain numbers on the mail-ins and forget to do the verifications, and then their votes won't count. And then separately, you have Donald Trump pursuing an appeal all the way up to the Supreme Court to try to implement his executive order to get the post service, which he's politicized, not to deliver mail, not to deliver the ballots, and to basically shut down the idea of mail-in, which, by the way, he's a mail-in ballot, a voter, which is part of this whole, WTF thing. So talk to us, though, because it's, to me, dual prong. We're seeing it in California, but we're seeing it across the country. There are similar props in other states that MAGA is pushing. Talk to us, though, about the fight regarding Prop 39 and what's going on in the Supreme Court.
Yeah, Prop 39 is essentially Trump's reincarnation of his federal SAVE Act that he's trying to pass in Congress, which is nothing more than another effort to try to interfere in elections throughout the country in various states. It's the reincarnation of his federal voter file that he wants to use to determine when a mail-in ballot can be submitted through the mail. If you're not on his list, then your ballot will not get mailed. It's not just ingenious; it's pretty nefarious. It's one of those things where you're going after people in ways that they just wouldn't expect. But what we see in California through Prop 39 is that this is their effort to try to intimidate voters, to present the obstacles that make it very difficult to vote, essentially trying to win elections without getting people to vote, because you scare people away, you make it difficult for folks. And unfortunately, he's got his disciple down here in California in Steve Hilton, the Republican nominee for governor, pushing for Prop 39. And so it's this constant 1-2 punch that Donald Trump employs of doing his bad deeds at the federal level, then getting his acolytes, his puppets in states throughout the country to do his bidding down here. And so whether it's Steve Hilton, the Republican nominee for governor, or the congressional Republicans who are pushing Prop 39 on the ballot here in California. They're all trying to do Trump's bidding, and Trump's bidding in the end is to try to keep people from voting and voting him out of office and voting against the things that he keeps trying to do.
You know, with this crazy news cycle, the election where obviously you finished first, but the top two go on. You're going against a MAGA guy, Steve Hilton. I don't know if it feels it wasn't all that long ago, but it feels like it may as well have been, years ago in my, but I want people to remember this race is going on and you can't take anything for granted, and you're traveling the state and you're campaigning hard. And it's not that jungle primary anymore. It's a one-on-one race. So
if he is to invest in crime suppression, I hope the President of the United States would look at the facts. Just consider Speaker Johnson's state and district. Just look at the murder rate that's nearly 4 times higher than California's. In Louisiana, this Speaker Johnson, 4x higher. I'm just offering, again, you've not seen this on Fox News, so President may not be familiar with these facts. So I want to present some facts to the President of the United States. And imagine this is alarming to the President to learn these facts, particularly Speaker Johnson, who's been such a strong partner and ally in these efforts. So the carnage in Louisiana is well defined. Of course, Mississippi.
Gravest threat to American democracy. If you disagree with him, he tries to prosecute you. If you beat him, he calls you illegitimate. This is not normal in a democracy. From Georgia to California, we must stop him. Let's sit with the specific structure of that statement, because it's built around 2 concrete, falsifiable claims rather than vague characterization. A specific accusation about prosecutorial retaliation against critics, and a specific accusation about refusing to accept electoral defeat as legitimate. Both claims connect directly to documented patterns we've traced across this entire series. The Comey indictments, the SPLC prosecution, the continued 2020 election denial we've covered extensively in previous reports. It's worth noting the timing of that specific statement too, because it arrived at the exact same general moment we detailed in our earlier report on Ana Navarro's own year of commentary, meaning multiple prominent Democratic figures were independently converging on nearly identical framing, describing this administration as a genuine existential Democratic threat within the same narrow window of days, without any obvious coordination beyond the shared underlying pattern of behavior they were all separately responding to. Let's also cover the redistricting clash, because it connects directly to the exact 8-state pattern Rachel Maddow warned about in an earlier report, and Newsom's own role in that fight deserves specific attention. The two men clashed directly over congressional redistricting efforts ahead of the midterms, with both camps accusing each other of prioritizing political advantage over genuine solutions. And separately, in May, Newsom personally approved a new California election security law, meaning his opposition to Trump's own redistricting and election security framing wasn't purely rhetorical. It came paired with an actual, signed piece of state legislation representing California's own competing approach to exactly the same underlying subject. It's worth including one more real thread of this feud before moving to the mayoral race dispute, because it demonstrates the sheer range of subjects this rivalry has touched across the entire year. Newsom and Trump also clashed sharply over California's wildfire response, with Newsom accusing Trump of playing politics with the disaster relief process. A specific, documented dispute over federal disaster aid that extended this rivalry beyond purely electoral and immigration subjects into genuine emergency management policy, with real consequences for California communities affected by those fires. Let me give you
Donald Trump, Todd Blanche, and Jeanine Pirro busted again. It appears more grand jury misconduct probably took place as they conjured and contrived their so-called reflecting pool case against 2-time Olympic canoeist David Hearn. David Hearn's lawyers filed a powerful motion in state court, in the Superior Court for the District of Columbia. Motion for disclosure of grand jury minutes and legal instructions. And this motion goes on to say that, like we've been seeing in federal grand juries, it appears that the Department of Justice in this D.C. Superior Court grand jury may not have been providing the grand jurors with accurate instructions about the crimes for which David Hearn was ultimately charged with regarding the reflecting pool. You may recall that when I was doing videos on this with Harry Littman, when the charges were initially brought, one of the things we speculated on this time, but based on the body of grand jury proceedings that took place thus far, is that what in the hell did they tell this grand jury? Because as you now know from watching the Midas Touch Network, in these grand juries, the judge isn't there. The lawyers, the criminal defense lawyers for the target aren't in the room. And so it's based on the presumption of regularity between the prosecutors doing their job following the law. And that ain't what the Trump regime DOJ does. So here's the motion by David Hearn's lawyers. Motion for disclosure of grand jury minutes and legal instructions. We've been seeing a whole lot of motions like this throughout the federal system. And this is one in the Superior Court system because of the fact that it took place in D.C., even though it's a felony. It's happened in D.C., so technically it's charged in a D.C. Superior Court. Based on a presentation by the government to a grand jury sitting in the District of Columbia, David Hearn was charged with 1 count of felony destruction of property. Counsel for David Hearn's review of certain transcripts from those proceedings provided by the government has revealed irregularities warranting disclosure of further information relevant to the grand jury's charging decision. Accordingly, Mr. Hearn respectfully moves pursuant to the Superior Court Rule 6E, which is just like the federal Rule 6E, for disclosure of the legal instructions provided to the grand jury concerning the elements of the charged offense.
Leads the nation as the #1 murder state in America. Imagine this in particular may resonate with the President of the United States. It's got a murder rate 180%. 180% higher than Los Angeles. It's interesting. LA has more people. These are all per capita numbers. More people than Los Angeles. Perhaps the president could deploy the National Guard in every corner of Mississippi. It's the murder rate's out of control there. Carnage. And governor may want to make that phone call. Again, if they care about the issues of crime and violence. I would note St. Louis murder rate is 190% larger than Oakland. I can go on. We can talk about the carnage in Arkansas, again, one of the top 10 murder states in America. 2.6 times greater than San Francisco. Again, these are just not just observations, they're stone cold facts. And the fact remains, if the president is sincere about the issue of crime and violence, there's no question in my mind that he'll likely be sending the troops into Louisiana and Mississippi to address the just unconscionable wave of violence that continues to plague those states.
My full analysis of why the Los Angeles mayoral race dispute deserves inclusion here too, because it's a genuinely revealing, more recent flashpoint. Trump accused California Democrats of cheating and trying to steal elections from Republicans after Democrat Nithya Raman finished ahead of Spencer Pratt in the Los Angeles mayoral race. A real electoral outcome Newsom's office responded to directly. Trump is lying about California again. That specific dispute over a single mayoral race result demonstrates just how granular and persistent Trump's election fraud framing has become, extending even into local municipal races, not confined to national or statewide contests. It's worth explaining who Spencer Pratt actually is in this specific race, because his own background adds a genuinely strange texture to the entire dispute. Pratt is best known as a reality television personality from the show The Hills, meaning Trump's fraud accusations centered on a municipal race where the losing candidate was a celebrity figure rather than a career politician. A detail that made the underlying stolen election framing considerably harder to take at face value, given that the results simply reflected a reality TV personality losing. A local mayoral race to a more conventional political candidate in a heavily Democratic city. Now here's where we make the turn, because everything you just heard represents a genuine, documented year of escalation between these two men. What we're bringing you next happened just today, and it involves the exact Attorney General nomination we've tracked across multiple previous reports on this channel. According to PBS's own reporting from today, Trump said he may temporarily pull Todd Blanche's nomination for Attorney General, as Republicans reportedly seek concessions connected to the confirmation process. Let's connect this directly to everything we've documented previously about Blanche. His role as Trump's own former personal criminal defense attorney, the federal court's own bad faith finding regarding the anti-weaponization fund settlement he personally negotiated, and last week's postponed committee vote we detailed in an earlier report.
And 2, the complete transcript or minutes of all grand jury proceedings relating to this matter. In the alternative, Mr. Hearn requests that the court review those materials in camera. The primary ground for this motion is a discrete and consequential issue: whether the grand jury received and applied legally sufficient evidence and was properly instructed on an essential element of malicious destruction of property, namely the amount of loss caused by the defendant's alleged conduct. In order to be charged with felony malicious destruction of property, a defendant must have caused damage in the amount of $1,000 or more. And to be charged a misdemeanor, a defendant must have caused some amount of damage of value. Here, based on the discovery provided to date, the government's sole grand jury witness on damages testified that the property was already damaged before Mr. Hearn allegedly touched it, that the same repairs would have been required regardless of Mr. Hearn's conduct, and that he could not quantify any loss attributable to that conduct. That testimony raises a substantial question: whether the grand jury had legally sufficient evidence of the loss element necessary to support the indictment, and whether the grand jury was properly instructed on that element. Additionally, other irregularities in the government's presentation of evidence to the grand jury further call into question whether the grand jury was misled in a matter that substantially influenced the decision to indict and that prejudice Mr. Hearn. And one of the things that we've seen the DOJ do frequently is something called vouching, where they say, this is a strong case, we feel good about it, you should indict. The motion goes on to talk about how this specific witness, remember the DOJ and Jeanine Pirro said, we have a star witness. Goes on to say the government's sole witness, there's one.
You know, for me, that's to me, that's the biggest reflection of this moment is how just the sewer that we're now living in because of Donald Trump. And he's allowed all of it us to feel free to shove again. And I think, if nothing else, forget.
But but many people would say that you are imitating him. You, among all the people who may or may not be running, you're the one who kind of imitates his style with the trolling. You're suing Fox now, I understand. You're suing. That's
well,
right
we're
out
going
of
into discovery. Fox better look to settle right now or apologize for defamation. But
okay, but that sounds exactly like what he does.
But different
suing
point.
Media.
Different point. Well, then don't defame, don't lie, and Fox
okay,
is
again,
a
but that does sound
network.
like him.
Well, here's the point. I'm trying to put a mirror up to Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And I think it's important with the sense of humor as well. The deviation of normalcy is off the chart. This is a guy cosplaying as the Pope, dressing up as Jesus. This guy putting his face on Mount Rushmore, doing it in all cap. None of this is normal. And you may recall when I first started doing this, the folks on Fox said, "Oh, this is so unbecoming of the governor of California."
The nation doesn't move from postponed vote to the president may pull it entirely without genuine, substantive underlying tension. This is not routine procedural friction. It's a real, documented crisis in one of the most consequential confirmation fights of this entire term. Let me give you my full analysis of why this specific development deserves such serious attention, because it connects directly to the exact institutional theme running through nearly every Newsom quote we've detailed tonight. Newsom has spent an entire year arguing that this administration prosecutes its critics while shielding its own allies from accountability. A potential Attorney General nomination collapsing specifically because Republicans themselves are extracting concessions, meaning even the president's own party isn't simply rubber stamping this particular pick. Suggests the institutional resistance Newsom has been describing extends beyond partisan opposition into genuine cross-party concern about installing someone with Blanche's specific, documented history atop the Department of Justice. It's worth explaining what kind of concessions Republicans might realistically be seeking in a situation like this, because it helps clarify the actual stakes of this specific negotiation. In confirmation fights of this nature, senators from the president's own party sometimes leverage their support for a controversial nominee to extract commitments on entirely separate priorities, additional oversight authority, specific policy commitments, or personnel concessions elsewhere in the administration. That kind of internal, intra-party leverage is a genuinely different dynamic than simple opposition party resistance, and it suggests the concerns about Blanche's specific history run deep enough that even allied senators feel they need something concrete in return for their continued support. Let's connect this to the broader news happening in this exact same window, because PBS's own reporting confirms the brief pause in the Iran war we detailed in an earlier report has genuinely ended. Trump used blunt language to threaten Iran with further strikes, responding to new Iranian attacks on a US base.
There's not witnesses. Remember Jeanine Pirro did that press conference? We got this witness and that witness and this witness and that witness. The government's sole witness concerning the loss is a National Park Service official, did not identify or quantify the loss. The witness's testimony established that the pool had substantial pre-existing damage requiring repair before any alleged conduct by Mr. Hearn. According to the witness, the pool was leaking more than 1 million gallons of water per week. Its expansion joints had exceeded their service life, and the liner already contained a rip. The government's witness further confirmed that repairs were already necessary to address those conditions. The witness testified that the repairs at issue would have been necessary regardless of Mr. Hearn's alleged conduct. The government's estimated repairs range from $6,000 to $15,000 was based on the size of an area rather than on damage attributed to any particular act by Mr. Hearn. And the government's witness expressly confirmed that the same estimated range of repairs, $6,000 to $15,000, would have still been necessary before the defendant interacted with the pool. Simply put, the government's witness could not identify any additional cost caused by Mr. Hearn's alleged conduct. Indeed, the witness did not even say or suggest that the alleged conduct had compromised the liner at all. When asked by a grand juror for the difference between the estimated cost of repairs before and after the alleged damage, the witness could not provide an answer. And it goes on to say the grand jury transcripts disclosed to defense thus far contains other irregularities that reflect a misleading presentation to the grand jury and a need for review of the entire grand jury record. For one, the government failed to present the widely available photograph discussed in Mr. Hearn's Rule 41G motion that by the government's own account was taken by Mr. Hearn before he ever touched the reflecting pool, and accordingly proves that he caused no damage to the pool. I want to bring in Harry Littman from the Talking Feds podcast, the Talking Feds YouTube, and the Talking Feds Substack. Harry, when these charges were brought, you and I showed Jeanine Pirro's press conference. We said, what witnesses are out there? And we said, to the extent there are, the moment they're under oath, what the hell are they going to say? And we know what they're going to say. And here we have one, and that one witness did not say anything that they were supposed to. So what the hell was actually said to this grant? What were they instructed on by Jeanine Pirro and Jeanine Pirro's team? And then obviously, Harry, let's just assume we get past the grand jury part here. This case goes to trial. The case will be rejected in 5 questions. What'd you see? I don't know. Did he do it? Yeah, I don't know.
He should wash out his mouth with soap and water with no situational awareness that their dear leader has been doing this for years and years and years. He's a man-child. And so I think it's important to call that out. Yeah. The dignity of the President of the United States. But again, we're not trying to dehumanize. We're just trying to reflect that reality and express the absurdity of all of this. And look, the absurdity, it's every day. It's a corruption story.
the Trump administration. You reference it obliquely in the opening monologue, but let's get serious. He's got 8 or 9 countries. He's done major golf course or development deals. It's meme coins and stable coins. It's a crypto. It's World Liberty Financial. It's getting, a piece of the peace. I mean, this peace board is about getting a piece for Witkoff and for Kushner. You see Donald Trump Jr. in the drone companies, in the mineral companies. You're seeing the kind of corruption. It's not, it's not $60 Bibles. It's not sneakers. It's not $100,000 watches.
In Jordan, the exact kind of renewed escalation we predicted in our previous report on the strike pause. And separately, Fox News' own live coverage confirms Trump announced what he called a historic agreement for the complete disarmament of Hamas, describing it as a major step in his administration's 20-point Gaza peace plan. Though that same reporting notes Hamas itself had not yet responded to confirm the agreement at the time of this recording. It's worth including a note of appropriate caution about that Hamas disarmament announcement, because Fox News' own reporting specifically flagged that Hamas itself had not yet responded to confirm the agreement at the time it was announced. A unilateral announcement of a historic agreement that the other party to that agreement hasn't actually confirmed follows a pattern worth watching carefully, given the broader context of overstated diplomatic claims we've documented across this administration throughout this entire series, including the fact-checked dud election documents and the contested Saudi nuclear normalization timeline, detailed in earlier reports. Let me give you my prediction section now, clearly labeled. Prediction 1. Expect the Blanche nomination situation to resolve through some form of compromise rather than a clean withdrawal, because temporarily pull language typically signals a negotiating tactic rather than genuine intent to abandon the nomination entirely. Watch for Republicans extracting specific policy or personnel concessions before the nomination resurfaces. Prediction 2. Expect Newsom's rhetoric to continue escalating specifically as the midterms approach, because his entire documented pattern across this year, from the National Guard rehearsal framing to the Davos knee pads to the 4th of July Declaration of Election Independence speech, shows a deliberate, considered strategy of increasing visibility and confrontation rather than retreat, consistent with widespread reporting that he's positioning for a potential 2028 presidential run. Prediction 3, and this connects back to tonight's material in an important way. Expect the rent-free in their head, dynamic Newsom himself acknowledged at Davos to continue in both directions, because an administration that responds to a sitting governor's substantive constitutional arguments with news come-ins.
What were the damages? I don't know. Were the damages before him? Yes. All right, no further questions. I mean, Harry, this is beyond vexatious. This is ridiculous.
It's ridiculous, and it seems to happen, Ben, again and again in all of their big ticket cases. They're doing the most elementary of blunders. Let me say a couple of things to set the table. First, of course, you're right. This is Superior Court. It's a different system. Nevertheless, it's the DOJ. So to the extent the DOJ is being hapless and just screwing the pooch in every big ticket case. This is obviously one. This is like a reprisal prosecution. It was brought just for Donald Trump's political purposes of being able to say vandals did this whole thing and all the damage rather than his own broken promises and false assurances. So it's that kind of big high profile case. And you ask in case after case, how do they screw this up? How do they screw up the big stuff again and again? So first point, Superior Court, when we're talking about DOJ on the job and the high profile items that they got to get right, it's the same as if it were a felony court in district court. Second, we are talking about not just an element of the offense, but the very one that they used to elevate this to a felony. It wasn't enough for them to be able to charge, because remember, it's the whole thing, vandals doing terrible things and cutting slits in the liner the size of 3 football fields. We know, by the way, what really happened there, and it was just reinforced by that witness, as you said, leaking 1 million gallons. That's because, and you and I did this in a different YouTube, they laid down on the layer and they really messed up at the seams. That's, of course, what was going on. But nevertheless, they wanted to, it wasn't enough for them to just say, aha, we got you. Because they wanted it to be a vandal who had caused all this damage. So this is an element of the crime. It's as if It's a felon in possession case, and nobody in the grand jury was told that there was a gun. I mean, it is the very thing that makes this into a felony, which is what they want. And they apparently...
One of wealth and privilege, and the other of more modest upbringing. The outsider on the inside, the interloper who learned to feel comfortable in many rooms.
I mean, we've got his podcast. We now have a book. Jeff, I wonder why he's doing this. I'm sure it has nothing to do with 2028.
Right. I mean, my gosh, he's an embarrassment for one. Is he trying to make us feel sorry for him? I mean, the vulnerable. I mean, give me a break. This guy has been the best thing for the state of Texas, the best thing for the state of Florida. He's driven
and the
all
worst
kinds
thing
of
for Californians.
Right. Driven all kind of businesses and people out of his state. I mean, who wants to live under his leadership? Look at what happened during the fires. I mean, look at how he's handled the riots. Look at what he has done as far as try to antagonize President Trump every opportunity he can. He's a phony. He's a fraud. He comes across as someone that doesn't have one genuine bone in his body. Of course, he's running for president. He's ramping up his rhetoric against President Trump to try to appease the far left in the Democrat Party, who are obsessed with Trump derangement syndrome. They just want somebody that's going to attack Donald Trump. So that's what he's doing.
Sustained. Here is the deeper truth connecting everything we've covered tonight. Gavin Newsom stood in Davos, held up a pair of joke knee pads, made the world laugh, and then told them, directly and honestly, that the joke was a deliberate strategy with real costs he was choosing to accept anyway. He spent an entire year doing exactly that, pairing genuinely serious constitutional arguments about prosecutorial retaliation and election manipulation with theatrical provocations designed specifically to generate exactly the reaction they got. And today, the same administration that responds to his substance with Newsom is reportedly reconsidering its own attorney general nomination because even its own party won't simply wave it through. Newsom said he lives rent-free in their head. Today's news suggests the rent might be coming due. This is USA Press. If tonight's report connected pieces you hadn't seen laid out together before, hit that like button right now. It costs you 1 second, and it puts this reporting in front of thousands more people who need to see how these stories actually fit together, especially given how easily a genuinely serious Attorney General nomination crisis can get overshadowed by louder headlines from an active war in the exact same news cycle. Subscribe to USA Press and turn on notifications, because between the Blanche nomination, the renewed Iran strikes, and whatever Newsom says next, we are not going anywhere. Drop a comment and tell us, was gravest threat to American democracy, or the Trump knee pads, the sharper Newsom moment from this entire year? And do you think a temporarily pulled Attorney General nomination signals genuine trouble for this administration, or simple negotiating theater? We want to hear where you land. Stay informed, and remember, you can call it unbecoming and still choose to do it anyway if you think the mirror needs holding up badly enough.